Baruch de Spinoza was a radical figure in the early Enlightenment, advocating for democracy and free speech. In this video, we delve into Spinoza's life and philosophy, examining the central concepts from his most significant works, Ethics and Theologico-Political Treatise. Watch the video in its entirety to discover why, despite his radical ideas, he nearly fell into obscurity and only gained recognition through a controversy nearly 100 years after his death. Baruch de Spinoza was born on November 24, 1632, in the Jewish quarter of Amsterdam. He went to a Jewish school and received an education in Hebrew. Young Spinoza found himself in conflict with the Jewish community, possibly due to his frequent interactions with a group of liberal Jews, including Juan de Prado, who was a prominent free thinker of the era. He raised doubts about the divine origin of the Mosaic laws and questioned the authority of the rabbis. Spinoza's genuine passion was philosophy, and as a result, he expanded his horizons beyond the study of the Talmud by enrolling in a Latin school. At this institution, Spinoza not only developed his proficiency in Latin, but also delved into the contemporary philosophical ideas. Most notably, he immersed himself in the writings of the French philosopher René Descartes, whose ideas were a focal point of intense discussions in the educated society of the 17th century. The divide between Spinoza and the Jewish community continued to widen, fueled by his conviction that blind adherence to religious tradition hindered the pursuit of true knowledge. This fundamental critique, which he would later elaborate on in his writings, faced resistance from the Jewish community. They made attempts to convince him to retract these statements, but their endeavors were unsuccessful. Spinoza found himself excommunicated by his community, a verdict that left the 23-year-old without means. As an outcast, he was prohibited from continuing to work in his family's business. This forced him to live in modest conditions, yet he remained unwavering in his commitment to philosophy and the quest for truth. He stayed in Amsterdam, where he pursued his studies, interacted with the circle of Juan de Prado, and began crafting his earliest writings. In 1660, the Jewish rabbis, with the help of the authorities, succeeded in making Spinoza leave Amsterdam for good. Spinoza left the city and moved to a distant village. There, he earned his livelihood as a lens grinder and quickly built new relationships. This was because the village had many collegians, a Christian community that believed in reason, tolerance, and freedom of speech within their religious community and as the basis for a state. These were ideas that Spinoza considered very essential and would later include in his writings. In the subsequent years, Spinoza changed his place of residence once again. He continued to lead a secluded life, occasionally receiving visits from a small circle of friends. Besides continuing his work as a lens grinder, he devoted his time to writing his major work known as Ethics. According to Spinoza, the pursuit of happiness and peace is the fundamental aspect of human life. However, to understand the nature of happiness and what is truly good, one must delve into the essence of the world and the role of the humans within it. Although this concept wasn't new in philosophy, Spinoza's unique exploration of the potential of human knowledge marked a pivotal moment in the history of philosophy. God, or substance, constituting of infinite attributes, of which each expresses eternal and infinite essentiality, necessarily exists. The concept of God in Spinoza's philosophy, as presented in the initial part of his work Ethics, represents a radical departure from the Judeo-Christian understanding of God. In contrast to a creator deity who intentionally and willfully brought the world, humanity, and nature into existence, Spinoza's God is an impersonal principle from which everything originates. This God is both the cause of the existing world and the cause of his own existence. Consequently, God is not a punitive or intentionally acting transcendent God who observes the world from outside. Instead, God is immanent, and therefore present everywhere. Whoever is in God, and without God, nothing can be or be conceived. From the people of the 17th century, such a theory challenged the prevailing order. When God no longer functions as the judge of human actions and transgressions, it raises fundamental questions. What becomes the basis for authority when there is no longer a divine intervention shaping the nature of things? Does this approach not risk undermining established norms of coexistence and legal regulations? Questions that Spinoza didn't consider significant. He was remarkably progressive, advocating for the freedom to think independently. He supported the development of individual judgments that were not constrained by biases, traditions, inheritances, or societal norms, while maintaining a balance between human emotions and reason. To grasp how distinctive Spinoza's ideas were compared to the typical beliefs in philosophy and religion of that era, it's important to understand the prevailing state of thought in the early 17th century. René Descartes, often seen as Spinoza's philosophical predecessor, adhered to a dualistic perspective, where he separated the realms of thought and the external world. This division had deep-rooted historical precedents. Here the soul, there the body, here the mind, there matter, here God, there the world, here the good, there evil, here reason, there sensuality. Spinoza rejects the idea of dualism and suggests that, in the end, there exists only a single entity, whether you call it God, nature, or something else. In Spinoza's perspective, mental, intellectual, and physically extended bodies are aspects of the same entity. This standpoint is referred to as monism. Monism posits that there is just one type of substance, contrary to Descartes' belief in two distinct substances. To better grasp René Descartes' two-substance theory, consider watching our video on René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy. Spinoza breaks free from dualistic thinking. Instead of highlighting opposing viewpoints, he unifies the different elements of the world and human life, which, according to him, is necessary to fulfill our desire for happiness, peace, and the pursuit of the good. To achieve this understanding, it is essential that external conditions, such as the state and its institutions, enable people to think freely and independently. In a free state, every man may think what he likes and say what he thinks, writes Spinoza in his Theologico-Political Treatise, discussing the role of religion, the Bible, and the importance of freedom of speech in a state. Published in 1670, its contents were revolutionary and posed potential risks to Spinoza's life. That's why he chose to publish it anonymously and in Latin to restrict its readership. The key message of his political theory is that a state can only truly succeed when it acknowledges and respects the need and interests of its citizens. This includes the freedom to think independently and freedom of speech, which permits individuals to express opinions that may not align with the contents of the Bible or the views deemed appropriate by politicians. While the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes believed that a state secures its citizens' survival by controlling their emotions and self-interest, Spinoza's perspective on the state's role is fundamentally different. According to Spinoza, a political community's primary duty is to provide every individual with the freedom and opportunity for independent thought. This is essential both for the state's stability and for the people's potential to attain happiness and freedom, thereby enabling peaceful coexistence. Essentially, the ultimate aim of a state is to foster freedom. Spinoza believes that the most effective way to do this is by having a state with a democratic constitution. In a democracy, everyone submits to the control of authority over his actions, but not over his judgment and reason. That is, seeing that all cannot think alike, the voice of the majority has the force of law, subject to repeal if circumstances bring about a change of opinion. Even though the Theologico-Political Treatise was published without the author's name in 1670, the educated public knew who had written it. This led to increased opposition, especially from religious circles. Spinoza was under strict surveillance. As a result, he was determined to prevent any Dutch translation of his political theory. In 1673, he was offered a professorship in philosophy at the University of Heidelberg. However, this invitation came with the condition that he should not express any views critical of religion. He declined the offer and chose to maintain his precarious but self-determined life. 4 years later, in 1677, Spinoza passed away at the age of 44. Baruch Spinoza, an advocate of democracy, freedom of speech, and independent thought, was nearly forgotten after his death. Neither Christian nor Jewish thinkers showed much interest in him, considering him too eccentric and radical. His criticism of the interpretation of the Bible and Talmud even led to accusations of atheism, which negatively impacted the reception of his work. Over a century later, during the 18th and well into the 19th century, a wave of neo-Spinozism swept through German philosophy and literature due to the pantheism controversy. Figures like Lessing, Herder, Goethe, Schelling, Hegel, and others embraced neo-Spinozism, largely thanks to Herder's influence. This controversy played a pivotal role in reintroducing Spinoza into the history of philosophy, in which he has since held a central place.